Our next speaker is Andrea Serles. You can see her now. Andrea Serles studied history at the University of Vienna, where she holds the position of a research assistant since 2013. And before that, she was working at the Institute for Medieval and Early Modern Material Culture. And the main focus of her scientific work is the addition of sources related to the Danube trade in early modern times. And apart from history of trade, Andrea Serles' research interests cover the history of public finance, administration, and constitution, as well as town history. And now Andrea Serles will tell us about sources, databases, repositories, the Danube Trade Project. And we are looking forward to your presentation. Thank you for coming, Andrea Serles.
The project cluster, the Danube Trade, was established by Peter Rauscher and exists till 2008 at the University of Vienna. Our indispensable partners are, on the one hand, the archives in Krems, Linz, and Vienna, and on the other hand, all the technicians who find solutions to our problems, like my colleague Thomas Walnick was already talking about. Since the beginning of the project, we have been technically supported, and even today I need a lot of technical support, by Beate Pampel from the University of Vienna. Parts of our image databases are already hosted by PHAIDRA, and with the Austrian Center for Digital Humanities and Cultural Heritage, we are working on solutions for long-term archiving and on different data exchange formats and download formats for the databases. The geographical focus of our sources is the German and Austrian section of the Danube. The temporal focus is on the 17th and especially 18th century. We are currently in the 4th project phase. All projects were funded by the Austrian Science Fund, FWF. From 2008, the 28 registers of the Civic Way House and of the staple fees of the city of Krems were edited via a database. Then from 2013 on, 25 Aschachtal registers have been processed, and in April 2021, the in-depth indexing and edition of the first Viennese Mercantile Protocol was started in parallel. Why are we dealing with the serial mass sources in particular? In general, the early modern German language trade history was for a long time mainly concerned with the heyday of Upper German merchant capitalism in the 16th century, rather than with the period between the 30 Years' War and the Industrial Revolution. Once powerful firms as the Fuggers and Welsers left impressive corporate archives to researchers, creating a veritable research boom. However, these top representatives have long made research on the countless smaller houses, merchant and market traders, seemed quite unattractive. Also, the mass of smaller players themselves left hardly any sources in the sense of business records. They can nevertheless be comprehensively researched with the help of municipal accounts and customs registers. These sources enable economic historians to make both qualitative and quantitative statements about business cycles, about trade relations between different merchants or cities, as well as, for example, changes in customer behavior. Account books are therefore among the most important sources for economic and social historians. However, the sheer volume of data in these sources has often hindered scholarly editions and therefore much more detailed research. It is the declared goal of the project, the Danube Trade, to at least partially close the gap in trade history research for the period around 1700 for the Upper Danube area, so the south of Germany and the Austrian Danube area, by making such sources easily accessible. The means to this end is the editing and indexing of mass sources usable for trade history. with the help of online databases. This is a quite expedient method, but it also brings along many problems, and some of those Thomas Walnick has already addressed, and I will go into much more detail in the course of my presentation. One problem itself is that we do not approach the indexing of sources in a neutral, but rather in a strongly data-oriented way. We do not provide real full-text editions, I have to admit, but rather lean databases that largely disregard linguistic components or the pictorial perception of the sources in particular. On the text wheel that many of you will know, introduced by Patrick Sale, which depicts the perspectives on a text typical in editing practice, the focus of our work in the Danube Trade project lies clearly as the text is an idea or intention, or more or less on the content and data of the text we are working with. The decision for this approach came about quite pragmatically. Since we work with very extensive source corpora, we wanted to generate reliable mass data within a manageable time frame. The data is already processed during the indexing in the sense of standardization. For example, individual entities like place names, etc., they're all standardized while put into the database. And on the other hand, by enriching each possible way we can, for example, that we use historical regions that are not in the manuscripts themselves, but that we know that, of course, St. Pölten lies in the historic region of Lower Austria, so we put this in the database at the same time. Much of the conceptual design was already planned from the perspective of the later user side, but always with a strong economic and social history focus. In the following part of my presentation, I would like to go into more detail about the databases we created and the sources on which we are working, discussing the advantages and the disadvantages associated with the variants we choose. The starting point of the anti-Danube Trade project were the registers of the Civic Way House and of the staple fees of the city of Krems. Peter Rauscher worked with these municipal administrative records as part of the Austria Judaica project, being mainly interested in Jewish traders. But soon he realized that these account books provide not only information on Jewish merchants, but rather provide a detailed overview of the general market activity in one of the most important trade towns along the Danube, since each entry contains the name and place of origin of the trader, as well as information on the traded goods. In some cases, the buyers of the goods and thus business relations are recorded as well. For the period from 1621 to 1737, 28 annual registers are conserved in the city archive of Krems. In some case, let me show you one page in more detail. If you separate the individual business cases on a typical page like this from the count books, you already get the basic structure of a table, which is why we decided to process the whole data inside the books using a relational database based on MySQL. Both the avoidance of redundancies, sometimes this type of sources reads like a telephone book, so it's not always very exciting, but with a lot of redundancies inside. They are avoided with the relational database, as well as that we could keep up a high data entry speed. And these spoke more or less were the two main reasons that spoke for this type of solution with a database and not a full text edition with XML, TEI, etc. Let's have a closer look at one data set. The last entry on this page, and I translated, reads more or less that on the 20th of June, 1701, Hans Gall from Trautenau or Trutnov sold to Andrea Serles, or here, which means in Krems, 5 rolls of Russian leather with a net weight of 180 pounds, and he had to pay 2 kreuzer as a fee. And more or less all entries followed this scheme. We enriched each dataset additionally by assigning the historical region to all identifiable place names. Furthermore, we labeled female and Jewish traders to facilitate a potential analysis of them later on. Names of persons and places were standardized. Place names followed their actual, nowadays, German name, and the same we did with family names that have many different versions. We always took the one that came up more frequently. Of course, this approach can only be used in a very limited way. And as an editor, you have to be absolutely sure that it is indeed the same place name and the same family name or the same person. The individual information, particles or entities, are stored in the relational database in dozens of individual tables and one main table. I have prepared here a small excerpt from the main table. You can see the entry for the 2 merchants, Skull and Apple, I was just showing, highlighted in blue from the June 20th, 1701. In total, this table has over 21,000 rows and more than 200 columns. So this is just a very small example from the main table. This form of presentation is, of course, not very user-friendly. Therefore, a graphical user interface was programmed, modeled after the search pages of the library catalog. Since most historians already 15 years ago, when we started the project, were quite familiar with the search in online library catalogs. You can work with a simple search for any keywords as well as with a detailed or advanced search with diverse scroll lists. If you were to search for the merchant Johann Gall we were talking about, you would get a hit list of 193 entries, so he was quite very busy in Krems. And even the hit list, if you look at it, looks very similar to the result lists you might know from the query of a library catalog and contains only some basic information, more or less the number of hits and maybe the date and the name of the participants. If one selects the entry for our example by clicking on the date, the detailed information follows, which contains all the data we could retrieve from the source. Date and archival signature, the information both on the 2 traders from Trautenau and Krems, including the addition of the historical region, the traded goods, and the paid fee. In this way, since 2013, 21,569 trade transactions, about 7,000 persons, and more than 900 places can be retrieved from our database. Since this edition was one of the first online editions of an entire account book series, we had no real role models. We always inevitably made many mistakes because not only from the design itself, but with the fastly advancing new technical developments, they showed ruthlessly the weaknesses of our designs. Let me address some of the most important points, and even Thomas Walnick has already given some hints what kind of problems might occur. In 2008, when we designed the project, the inclusion of facsimiles, for example, was far from state-of-the-art. Very soon, however, we realized that the missing pictures significantly reduced the value of our work, and so we subsequently, much later on, incorporated them. After all, the provision of thousands of facsimiles creates a real added value compared to a conventional book edition and makes the work verifiable at any time and for anyone. Since the facsimiles were not numbered in continuous pages, but rather according to pages with a recto and verso indication, the transfer of the images to PHAIDRA became considerably more difficult than we thought in the beginning. Gerhard Gonter of PHAIDRA is currently working on solving this problem and at the same time creating a monthly index for easier browsing. Furthermore, and Thomas was talking about this too, we as well were very naive and did not think about the protection of our intellectual property. Originally, we put the database online without licensing and any hints about the desired citation. In the meantime, all parts are provided with a Creative Commons license and guidelines for the citation. We have to admit, unfortunately, users still rarely implement this in practice. There are many times we read, I don't know, the data retrieved from the Danube Trade Project, but it is not the Danube Trade Project, it's still Peter Rauscher and Andrea Serles who are doing all the work. And like with any other book, you would like in the end to read your name because you need the citations for the next funding period at least. So this is a still weak point where we ask all users to really admit that the work was done by Peter Rauscher and me. All the database entries have been double-checked before we put them online. Nevertheless, one always finds errors or new knowledge about individual places and persons or goods. This leads to the question of versioning, which we have so far solved only very inadequately by making additions in the common field. And this is kind of sad because especially this kind of addition would open the possibility of a very dynamic system of constantly adding new knowledge to it. But of course, we need to find a solution for the versioning problem, and the situation in the moment is still highly unsatisfactory for us. Just as little as the integration of facsimiles, the use of authoritative files was not a common tool in historical editing practice in 2008, 15 years ago when we started. In 2017, we began to develop at least rudimentary standard data sets for persons and places with numerous links to authoritative file systems such as the GND, die gemeinsame Normdatei, for persons or geonames for places. While each of the more than 21,000 records has a unique ID in the database, it does not have a persistent identifier in the same sense of standardized handles such as DOI. A problem we are still working on. We would also like to find a solution for making results from the database available in a simple print or download format. Currently, it is only possible to work with the Danube Trade Project database online, but it is not possible to save and convert query results. Since the data itself is very well structured in these tables I have shown, a conversion should not pose any major problems. Unfortunately, we lack the human and financial resources to tackle this problem so many years after the completion of the project in 2013. To date, the entire database is stored on the project's web space at the University of Vienna and is continuously maintained at the project team in our spare time, so that the database is fully functional still. After finishing the transfer of the facsimiles to PHAIDRA, we will try to find a way of long-term archiving for the database as well. This could be either with PHAIDRA itself or with the ACDH. We have tried to avoid all these problems from the beginning in the much larger sub-project, the edition of the toll registers of Aschach. They are the most extensive surviving collection for research on early modern trade in the Austrian Danube area at all. This series is preserved with minor gaps from 1627 to 1775, and thus for a period of almost 150 years. Since 2013, we have managed to edit 25 volumes out of this mass, spanning the period from 1706 to 1740. At the Aschach toll station, all cargoes transported on the Danube and their owners were recorded, including the names and places of origin of the skippers. The market town of Aschach itself is located between Linz and Passau, relatively close to the historic border between Upper Austria and Bavaria. Thus, with the help of the Aschach toll registers, one can gain a first-class insight into the transport of goods between Upper German trade centers such as Nuremberg, Augsburg, or Regensburg, as well as the Transalpine trade with the Austrian Danube region. The data structure of the toll registers of Aschach is much more complex than the entries in the accounting books from Krems. There are three different information levels: date, means of transportation, and cargo, including passengers. They are split into three different entry levels in the database, as well as presentation levels on our homepage. Each different level can be enriched with additional information and is linked to one identifier, which is the consecutively numbered passage. The first entry level, marked in green, comprises the basic information of each passage: the date of the passage, as well as the archival signature of the volume and the page number. In this example, the ID would be 307. Please remember, it will reoccur all the time. At this level, each record is linked with the corresponding scan of the account book. The second level of the database, marked here in gray, refers to the means of transportation. It contains the name of the shipmaster. Here in this example, it's Michael Scheibenbogen, the place where he starts, which is Linz. If mentioned, the place of destination, the amount of vessels, and of course, again, the paid dues. If it was upstream shipping, we even have the amount of horses that were needed for drafting the ships upstream. They are always mentioned in the end of the entry, and in our case, this ship is going upstream, starting in Linz, drawn by 4 horses. The third orange level contains the most interesting particle for us, and this is the information on the transported cargo and or passengers. In our example, there are no passengers, but quite typical cargo for upstream shipping on the Danube. And this is wax. If we have a closer look at the last entry, we find out that 8 barrels of wax weighing 70 centner were transported upstream for a person named Balthasar Hanfstingel. He had to pay the quite considerable amount of 7 florins at the toll station. The query mask still looks a lot similar to a library search tool. With a basic and an advanced search, it is even possible to combine both on basis and both search types with an and relationship. One example, the inquiry of wax transport in 1728 would lead to a simple result list with 51 records. If you click on the date in the left margin, the complete data set appears again, a system that we already know from the Krems database. You find the wax transport of Mr. Hanfstingel at the bottom, together with the other cargo on this specific ship with the ID 307. Because we were inquiring for wax, all the wax is highlighted in blue, and so we find out very easily that on this ship, the only cargo was indeed wax, adding up to 192 centner or 10 metric tons. We were not able to present the scans here on the same page because a multitude of ships has more than 100 or 200 different cargoes. And so there are 10, 12, 13 pages we need to present. But by clicking on the scan sign here on the right side, you would be automatically connected with the page. And as you can see easily, all the books from Aschach are already hosted by our partner PHAIDRA. There you could have a look at this single page, or you could go, of course, to the whole volume of 1728. And the colleagues there were so nice and made an index where you can search now even directly each single day. So many thanks to Gerhard Gonter, who made this search possible. It was very helpful when the Gerhard Gonter was making this Inhaltsverzeichnis or index, because we found out many mistakes we had in our database when, for example, somebody forgot to connect the scan with the right date, or a complete senseless date was entered. So then he always sent a red flag and said, people, I think there's something is wrong. So we did not only give all our pictures to PHAIDRA, they helped us a lot to improve our database at the same time. As of today, we have all 25 surviving volumes from 1706 to 1740 completely entered into the database that contains more than 48,000 ship movements with over 360,000 single cargoes. We have identified over 1,100 different place names and linked them to authority files. Finally, well over 30,000 individuals are stored in the database. We have come very close to our goal of generating mass data from a mass source within a manageable amount of time. I'm currently still busy with the additions to the place name authority file system. As soon as this work will be finished, and it has to be finished latest February 2022, when the third project phase ends, all databases will be handed over to the ACDH, which will take over the long-term storage and the implementation of download and conversion options. PHAIDRA manages exclusively all Aschach facsimiles, altogether by now more than 25,000 pictures. In the future, our homepage will only be the access portal. April of this year, Peter Rauscher began editing another important source in Austrian Danube history, the Viennese Mercantile Protocol, a directory of Viennese merchants from the years 1725 onwards. Here we have taken new paths by making first experiments with transcribus, about which I, or Peter Rauscher himself, will be able to report in detail, maybe at the next PHAIDRAcon. Many thanks for joining my presentation.
Thank you very much, Andrea, for this quite exciting presentation, your talk, and also for the insight in your work. I think it's very helpful for us to know so much about your work. It's like with Thomas, we are very happy that you are in our network so that we can discuss all these things. Thank you very much.
I have to say we are very happy that we have you as our partners, because otherwise we would be completely lost, being historians, being interested in economic and trade history, but having a very thin technical background. So thank you to all the guys out there that help us, especially Gerhard Gonter and Raman Ganguly and Beate Pampel. Thank you.
Thank you. They're really great. Yes, I know. I'm very happy with them. So, are there any questions or comments from our participants? Please feel free to ask Andrea Serles. I have to look in the chat now, because no, nothing. They're all very impressed of your work, I think.
I know that, but it's the thing with the big data, that what we always want to do was to create a real considerable amount of data so that we really can work with it. We realized very soon, if you only take one account book, then you might be completely wrong if you want to say something about a bigger time span, because you can be very unlucky and take, for example, the year 1711. You would think nothing ever happened on the Danube, but, and we all know what we are talking about, 1711, the plague was going around in the Danube area. And so there was nearly no traffic on the Danube. If you come 4 years later, then you have a lot of data. So for us, this was the tool to avoid the mistake of, if you have just a very small sample, of getting a sample that in reality says nothing about the long-term effects of something. So it is a lot of work to get this mass data, but then you really can be very happy in getting data that really says something, where you can make theories, etc., and prove if they are right or not.
That's a very good point. Thank you. And I think that your data is also usable for many scientists. I don't know. I think they can use your pictures and also the descriptions for other projects maybe, and it's very useful for everybody. Okay, if there are no questions and no comments in the moment, I hope you will stay with us.
I will, of course. I'm looking forward to all the other interesting.
Yes, Fanny have a question. Please, Fanny.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And I think Thomas Warnick has also a question.
Funny.
He also just raised his hand. Thank you so much for this exciting presentation of this very amazing project. I was just wondering, because you said that you started also incorporating authority files and collecting, you know, names and places and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering whether you're also thinking about sharing them, for example, the place taxonomy with Pelagios or other larger projects, which can, on the other hand, also enrich the common general DH knowledge about places. And the same with with names. I mean, name authority files is such an important aspect, as you just said. So many of those names are not standardized. Obviously, they were written differently. People have addressed to themselves differently. Then we have something, you know, we have the issue of different scripts very often.
Yes.
And because you also address the fact that obviously there are a lot of Jewish agents in your records. It would be, I think, important to think about how to link them to, for example, Hebrew spellings or, you know, Yiddish spellings and so on and so on. So that is just a question about whether you're thinking about sharing those thesauri and those authority files that you have been assembling. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for this very important question. We are absolutely open to share all the data that we produce. We do not want to keep anything to ourselves. So it doesn't matter if it's the database itself, it will be completely free. We have Creative Commons license, share alike. And so all the data we produce will be completely open and might be used by everybody, even the authority files, and we would be open in integrating them into bigger systems as well. So as long as we get a technical solution, how we can do this, we would be open to do this, of course.
That's great, Andrea. Thank you very much. So is there anybody, Thomas, you wanted to?
Yeah, actually, I will not take much of the time, but I was just wondering if it's probably a question that you, Andrea, and Peter will have heard many times. And I must confess that I did not just use PHAIDRA in teaching, but I also used the Danube Trade project in teaching. And I was thinking with some students about how to model that in a way that it could be used in a similar way that Orbis is set up. I put that into the chat. You know that this is one of the, #1 signature projects where you can just enter a couple of parameters and then calculate from where to where in the Roman Empire of late antiquity, winter, summer, by boat, by carriage, whatever. So obviously this is not an analysis instrument, but a little bit of a tool to play around. There's also something similar now coming up for the northern parts of the Holy Roman Empire in the early modern period. Is there any chance of seeing a Orbis-like adaptation of the Danube Trade project data, so that you can enter how long would it take a piece of leather to come from here to there? How much money would that cost?
We haven't thought about this yet, to be honest. As I said before, we're very open to all this kind of usage. Even if somebody comes and says, may I take your data and put this tool on top of it, we would say, yes, please take it, do something with it. All this data was more or less aggregated by Peter Rauscher and me with the help of a couple of students who put in one book. But even for us, the day has only 24 hours, sometimes 48, but normally it's only 24 hours. And if we would have enough time, we would do even much more. We have many ideas, but as long as we depend on 3 years funded projects, we have to try to get out as much as what we promised to the Science Fund to get the next funding period. So if somebody's out there who wants to do something with data, everybody is welcome. But to think about things like a better geographical presentation of the data, etc., would be very interesting. And that's something we have in mind anyways. But thank you for the suggestion, Thomas. Thank you.
Thank you so much.